Hi everybody, welcome to Two Realtors and a Couch. So today we're going to talk about the different types of representation a buyer and seller will encounter when trading in real estate. These are what we would call the fundamentals any buyer and seller need to know. So there's three things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what seller representation is. We're going to talk about what buyer representation is, and lastly we'll talk about what multiple representation is and what that entails. But the first thing we need to do, Natasha, is determine the two different categories a buyer or a seller will fall under. The first is what we would call a customer. And a customer is someone that we have nothing in writing. There's no written agreement, there's no written contract. And as a customer, we owe information only.
Yeah, so someone that's inquiring on one of our listings, someone that sent us an email, someone that just wants some information, kind of the first step, the first meeting.
Exactly. There's three things that we have to do for a customer. First thing is we have to make sure that we're providing honest information about the property. We have to disclose anything that we know about the property that could affect whether or not that customer would want to purchase that property. Okay. The second thing is we have to deal with everybody fairly and ethically.
Very important.
Which means provide every customer with the same quality of information about a listing. Next would be what we call duty of care. And what that means is because we're not representing that customer, we're just providing them with information. The course of action that customer decides to take, that's up to them. Okay? So the second category is what we would call a client. And a client is a seller or a buyer that we have under contract. And the fundamental difference between a customer and a client is this. A customer, I give information only. But a client, I can give advice to. I can tell them what course of action that we should take. I can advise them throughout the entire process. Now, there's 6 things, which is what we call 6 fiduciary duties that we owe to our clients. This is whether or not you're a buyer client or a seller client. First thing, full disclosure. Which means anything we know that's going to help that client, we're going to tell them, right? The second thing would be confidentiality, which means what we talk about is confidential at all times, unless given permission to say otherwise, which is typically done in writing, right?
Exactly.
In the form of an offer. Next would be competence, which means we as realtors have to prove to our clients that we know what we're doing, okay? And that we're competent to advise them throughout any transaction. Next would be accounting, which means any deposit checks we were to get for a property, any documents that we were to sign, we're accountable for those documents, accountable for that money. We have to get them to where they have to go.
Exactly.
Right? Next is obedience, and this is the big one, right? We have to do what our clients want us to do as long as it's legal.
Exactly.
Right? So although we're there to give you the different courses of action that you can take, the final decision is always yours. Right? So we have to do what you want us to do. And lastly is loyalty, which means the interests of our client supersede our own at all times.
At
It's
all times.
what's best for our clients, not what's best for us. So a client that's being represented as a seller, we would have what we call a listing agreement signed. And it's that agreement that makes that seller a client. And that's what we would call seller representation, right? If I was dealing with a buyer and we were representing that buyer as a client, we would have them sign a buyer representation agreement, and that buyer would be dealt with as a client.
And the buyer representation agreement can be handled in different ways as well. You can put it for a set trading area for a set amount of time. Let's say we're working with them for 3 months in North Bay. You can set it for a specific day, so anything that you see on that specific day is a contract between you and that client, or you can set it for a specific property. So if you just want to see that one property with that one agent, you can write it that way too. So there's different ways to handle that agreement as well.
Yeah. And the best way that I can explain a buyer representation agreement when I do a buyer presentation is it's a symbol of loyalty and commitment between the buyer and his or her realtor. Okay? It's a business relationship. Right? Natasha and I are married, right? And I'm going to put Tasha on the hot seat here. Okay? Natasha, would you be with me if I wasn't loyal and committed to you?
No.
Right? And it's the same thing in any personal relationship or business relationship. There needs to be loyalty and commitment from both parties. So that's what those agreements represent. Okay? So the last thing we're going to talk about, right? We talked about seller representation, right? When a seller is a client. We talked about what buyer representation and what that means, right? When a buyer is a client.
Exactly.
And now we're going to talk about multiple representation. And that's when the realtor represents represents the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Now, all of the contracts are with that realtor's brokerage, okay? So it could be a Laframboise team buyer, but the listing can be from another realtor inside our office. That would still be considered multiple representation.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that realtor's specific listing. As long as it's a listing within their brokerage, that would be multiple representation. What happens in that case there is there's certain things that can and cannot be talked about. Number one, we couldn't disclose whether or not that seller would take less than the listed price. Okay. Number two is we couldn't tell that seller what that buyer is willing to pay. We'd have to put it in writing. They'd have to go back and forth, right?
Which is what your offer is for.
Which is what your offer is for. The next thing is you can't disclose any personal information about either party. It's irrelevant. It's whether or not that house is a good house for that buyer.
We always get asked, why are they moving? Why are they selling, right? And we always say, because, why are you buying? Because you want to move. So we can't disclose those particular details either.
Exactly. The next thing is we can't tell a buyer what to pay, and we can't tell a seller what to accept. Okay, but we can tell you what we think based on market information, right? What we can tell you is what that seller paid for that property, what improvements they may have done. We can even show you the comparables that were potentially utilized by either that realtor to justify that sale price. But last but not least is we cannot disclose any terms of any other offers. So if there was an offer on that property, we could find out why it didn't go if it wasn't our listing specifically or if it was a realtor from inside our office. But we couldn't talk about what the price and the terms of that offer was. We can know what had occurred. Maybe the buyer's financing wasn't in order, right? Maybe they had a change of heart. Who knows? Okay. But multiple representation is there to protect both parties. And does it work? Yes, it does. If you follow the rules and you follow the proper protocol.
Exactly. And first things first is to know what those rules are. And we always go through that with our clients. It's also written in your working with the realtor paperwork, as well as your listing paperwork and the buyer representation paperwork.
Exactly. So if we can give you any advice or any tips, is if you're buying and selling, whether it's for the first time or whether you haven't purchased or sold within the last 10, 20 years, whatever it may be, means to you the rules of the game. Okay, what are the different types of representation, right? What services are offered, right? What can you expect? Okay, and we're firm believers if you know what to expect, that reduces a lot of stress and anxiety and makes the process more enjoyable.
Exactly.
So a little bit of fundamentals for you guys out there. Thank you for tuning in, and we always appreciate the feedback and the constructive criticism, and we hope you guys have a great day.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so that we can continue to provide you with some great real estate tips.
And if there's any questions or anything you'd like for us to maybe discuss on a later episode, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to address those questions.
Absolutely.
So that's all we have for today. I'm Matt Laframboise, Sales Representative with Realty Executives at the Laframboise team.
And I'm Natasha Laframboise, Sales Representative at Realty Executives at the Laframboise team.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everyone. You can do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it ready?
Yeah, it's been running this whole time. I'll go make sure.